One.
Good afternoon. Welcome to today's webinar on the SQE. Now, a reminder that the SQE stands for the Solicitors Qualifying Examination. Some people call it the SQE, but we're a serious, boring regulator, so we call it the SQE. Now, today's session on the SQE is going to be focused specifically on what it means for law firms, just over 1 year on from the SQE being introduced. And you'll get to hear from the SRA, but actually, the bulk of this session, we're going to be focusing on how law firms are responding to the SQE. And I'm delighted to be joined by three panelists to do that, who are all at the centre of developing their firm's approach to the SQE. So we've got Catherine from Eversheds, she's based up in Leeds. We've got Helena from Capital Law in Cardiff. And we've also got Nicola from Acuity Law, who is also in Cardiff. So obviously, to be part of this webinar, you don't have to be based in Cardiff, but it does help. Now, the types of topics I'd like to cover today are things like how are firms approaching training, what are they doing about qualifying work experience, and issues such as apprenticeships. But we also want to be led by what you want to hear about. So you can submit your questions on the link below. We're going to be primarily focused on questions from an employer perspective. We'd always like to know your name when you're submitting questions, so put that in there. But also, if you don't want to, you can submit questions anonymously. So click on the link below this video and put your questions in. Now, to kick us off, we're going to hear from Julie Swan, who joined the SRA over the summer, and she's the SRA's Director of Education and Training, and she's got decades of experience in education and assessment, including in the legal sector, and most recently was an Executive Director at Ofqual. So, Julie, over to you. How have things gone with the SQE so far?
Thanks, Ben. Yes, and thanks for that introduction. So, yes, how have they gone? Well, first of all, let me just set the scene a bit by a reminder as to why we changed. Why did we change from the LPC and that tried and tested route to the SQE? And there should be a slide. Yes, here we are. Well, in fact, before we change, let's just have a quick reminder about what it is. First of all, the SQE, it's a single national licensing exam, one exam that everybody takes, with the great benefit that everybody is assessed in the same way. We don't any longer specify how aspiring solicitors must prepare for their assessments or the routes to qualification. The focus is very much on the assessment, and the first of the assessments was in November 2021. So if you look at the jigsaw on the left, we've got SQE, the green box, SQE1 and SQE2. The Solicitors Qualifying Exam is divided into two parts. The first part is the multiple choice assessments taken over 2 days with a focus on functioning legal knowledge. And SQE2 is a mixture of oral and written assessments, which assesses candidates' skills and their ability to apply their legal knowledge in the type of context in which a newly qualified solicitor might find themselves. I'm not going to dwell on the yellow bit of the jigsaw, the degree or equivalent qualification, but that is a prerequisite to qualification. And I'm not going to cover the red bit of the jigsaw either, but that just reminds us that we do check that anybody seeking to join the solicitor's profession is of suitable character and suitability. I will, though, touch on qualifying work experience, which must be completed over a period of a total of 2 years or the equivalent. Okay, so I jumped ahead of myself. Let's now just remind ourselves why we changed. We were concerned about the possibility that the previous route to qualification that had the focus on the LPC and the training contract wasn't delivering the assurances about the standards that we really needed as the regulator of the profession, and that applicants were potentially being assessed to different standards. There was an inconsistency of approach. We were also worried there was a lack of flexibility and potentially unnecessary regulatory barriers in the way of people qualifying. Lots, as we know, has changed and no doubt will continue to change in the world of education and training. The makeup of people joining the profession is much more diverse perhaps than it once was, and that's very much to be applauded. But people have different learning styles, they have different learning preferences. Some want to study part-time, some full-time, some want to study while they earn. So we were concerned that the old approach didn't allow providers to respond to the demands and expectations of those seeking to join the profession. And we were also concerned very much about the high cost of qualification. The LPC has been costing upwards of, well, 12, 13, 14, 15, I even heard of £17,000, and that's just for the fees. And that, of course, comes on top of students' undergraduate debts in the main. So we were worried about the cost and the impact that that could have on the diversity of entrants to the profession. So the benefits of changing are that it enables us as regulator to provide stronger assurances to consumers of solicitors' services, that everybody joining the profession has demonstrated that they have met the minimum standard that we would expect of a newly qualified solicitor. It's fairer for aspiring solicitors as everybody is assessed on a level playing field. We are starting to see that training providers respond to the opportunities that this new approach provides them to tailor their training provision to suit the range of expectations of candidates who are coming through, and critically to offer cost-effective training options. So we're seeing intensive courses and more extended courses. We are seeing courses that are preparing candidates to take the SQE embedded within an academic qualification, such as an undergraduate degree or a master's degree. We're seeing face-to-face provision, we're seeing distance learning provision, we're seeing hybrid provision. It's early days, but we very much expect the training market to continue to develop. And we are seeing the benefits of the flexibility of approach and the removal of barriers which we consider to be unnecessary. And in particular, the opportunities for aspiring solicitors to undertake their qualifying work experience in different ways is very much paying benefits to the range of people that are able now to qualify. So how's it going? Well, we've had 4 SQE sittings so far. The second SQE2 sitting finished just last week. About 6,500 candidates have now sat the assessments for the first time, and almost 450 solicitors have now been admitted through this route, including a number of apprentices who, by the way, have done particularly well in the assessment so far. The written assessments have been taken in a number of countries, 66 so far, and as I've already said, the education and training market is starting to respond to the opportunities that are now available to them. The one downside is that we have seen a continuation, it's not a new thing, but a continuation of a troubling attainment gap in terms of the way in which candidates with different ethnic backgrounds in particular have performed in the assessments. And that's something that we continue to explore, and indeed we've commissioned some research from the University of Exeter to help us understand what's gone on in the past and what might need to be done about this in the future, not necessarily by us, but perhaps by the education sector more generally. Okay, so that's the SQE. So now let's just have a little look at qualifying work experience, QWE. A reminder that everybody who wants to qualify as a solicitor must undertake the equivalent of 2 years qualifying work experience, can be undertaken full-time or part-time. We're very flexible in terms of how that work experience can be gained. The strict requirement, though, is that that work experience must be gained in the context of the provision of legal services, and that anybody undertaking it must be developing at least 2 or more of the competences as set out in the Statement of Solicitor Competence. If you've looked at the Statement of Solicitor Competence, it's hard to imagine anybody who's working in the provision of legal services not covering many more than 2 of those competences. Qualifying working experience can be done in England, Wales, or indeed overseas, and it doesn't have to be undertaken in an organisation that we regulate. And it can be undertaken in up to 4 separate organisations providing legal services. There's no minimum or maximum length for any period of study. I was visiting a university last week, for example, and I spoke to some students who had undertaken a placement in private practice, solicitors practice, in the context of their degree course, and there's no reason why that could not contribute towards their qualifying work experience, just as an example. Can be current, can be previous roles. In terms of confirming QWE, which is where you, if you're working for a firm, might have a particular interest, confirmation of QWE must be given by a solicitor or a COLP within the organisation where the work took place, although the person who is confirming QWE does not need to hold a practicing certificate. If the work experience was undertaken some time ago, then it might be appropriate for a solicitor who worked with the person who wants that signed off to confirm it. They'll need to be able to confirm that they reviewed the work that the applicant undertook during their work experience, and that there was feedback given to the person who was supervising their work. What needs to be confirmed is the next question, and perhaps critically, what doesn't need to be confirmed. So what needs to be confirmed by anybody signing off the QWE is that the applicant was exposed to some or all of the competences, but critically, the person signing this off is not required to confirm that the individual is competent. That assessment of competence comes through SQE, and in particular SQE2, where we're assessing how candidates would perform in the types of tasks, as I've said, that solicitors would typically be undertaking at the start of their careers. There must be confirmation of the length of the experience, and if there have been any character or suitability issues that have been a concern, those should be flagged, and then a wider confirmation that it meets our general criteria. Things to consider then as a firm. You might want to be considering now how you're going to confirm, if you're approached by a candidate who says that they've undertaken a QWE with you, how that will be checked and who might be best placed to make the confirmatory statement. How will you manage retrospective claims? Are you keeping records? So you might have somebody who's worked with you in the past, or somebody who's working with you currently who might not seek to make the claim now but might do so in the future. How will you hold those records? How will you access them should the need arise? What will recording QWE look like in your firm? And how might you manage expectations around QWE and qualifications? I think we might be hearing, when we get on to the main point of today's session, how firms are responding to this. There's no set approach, but it's just something that you might need to be thinking about. What does good QWE look like? Well, ideally, you will be providing a variety of experiences and exposure to a wide range of competences. But as I said, strictly is only exposure to 2 of the competences that are required. Opportunities for reflection on performance to help the candidate identify their strengths and the areas for development would be ideal. Exposure to ethical issues would be great, and of course, and you would want to ensure this anyway, effective supervision. I've only been able to give you a flavour, although, as I say, you will be hearing more right now from firms as to how it's going, but we would encourage you to keep in touch with us, and there's some contact information on this slide. Do raise any particular queries that you have with us, follow our updates in our bulletin, etc. Join our LinkedIn group. Anyway, I can't really do justice to all the ins and outs of SQE and QWE in this short time, and I certainly don't want to take any more time in this session, because I know that you really want to hear from the main act, which is our panellists who are making this work within their firms. But thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Julie. That was really interesting. But yes, dare I say, to echo you, even more interesting we'll be hearing from those at the coalface who are having to respond to this change. And so let's move on to our panellists. I was going to ask each of them to start off by telling us how their firm is responding to the SQE. And just before I do that, I see we've already got a few questions coming in. We will get on to them, but just a reminder, you can carry on submitting questions at the link below this webinar. So Catherine, shall we come to you first? How's Eversheds responded to the SQE?
Yes, thanks, Ben. So just to introduce myself, so I'm Catherine Knight and I manage our emerging talent function at Eversheds Sutherland. I've been with the firm for about 6 years, so the SQE has been on my radar probably since at least that point, if not well before. And we, as a firm, recruit approximately 50 trainee solicitors per year. And since 2016, we've also been recruiting solicitor apprentices as well. So we recruit about up to 10 apprentices per year onto that programme too. I think we started our SQE planning and journey in earnest probably about 3 years ago. And the first thing that we did was actually to identify individuals within the firm to form a working group. So individuals who were sort of linked to trainees or training development, etc., who had a real interest and knowledge in this area, who would also be able to make certain decisions on behalf of the firm. So I, along with some others, so our training principal, learning and development colleagues, head of knowledge, head of technical training, etc., formed that group. And the first thing we did was to really sit down and brainstorm a lot of questions and things that we would need to answer and come to decisions on together. And I'd say probably the overarching first sort of highlights around that were around when were we going to transition to the new SQE model? So who would be our first sort of trainee intake to go through the SQE? Secondly was around what would our future offering look like under the SQE in terms of the sort of 2-year qualifying work experience piece, the replacement of the training contract. Would that look any different to what it does currently? And then finally, how would the SQE sort of fit in with the timings of all of that? Would we, would we ask our future trainees to undertake the SQE before or during their sort of working experience with us? So those were sort of the first key things, I suppose, that we sort of sat down and thought about. And in terms of sort of decisions, our first trainee intake who will come through the SQE will be those joining us in 2024. Those are offers that we made just over the course of this summer. And in terms of the SQE and when that will happen, we decided that as a firm, it sort of fitted us best for them to do it before they actually join us for their 2 years of experience. So we've decided to fund our future trainees through an SQE preparation course that they'll undertake and then take the SQE exams in the actual academic year before they join us. And in terms of then once they come to us and what that 2-year sort of experience will look like, we did a lot of sort of research around this. We did surveys both internally with partners, others in the firm, with our trainees, and also with prospective candidates as well. And I think what was coming out loud and clear is that I think there was still a real sense that trainees need to get a breadth of experience, and that's what people would want and expect. So we made the decision that we would still get our trainees to move around the business and get experience in different practice areas over the course of the 2 years as well, in the same way that they do now. So those were sort of the initial thoughts. As I say, there were lots of other questions that then led on from that, but that was really the starting point for us, and then it all went from there.
Thank you, Catherine. And I think we'll dig into some of that detail because, yeah, that's really interesting. If I could now come to Helena, what about you? How are you approaching things at Capital Law? You're just on mute, Helena, I think.
Apologies, Ben.
That's all right. Go ahead.
I'll try again. So I've been with Capital for just coming up to 3 years. Joined as talent manager and joined at a time where Capital as a firm are growing. So I think our SQE journey was probably one of the main things I picked up upon joining Capital. And I'd say it's been quite an interesting journey in terms of we're aligning it with the growth we're experiencing at the moment. So the approach we've taken in some way mirrors some of what Catherine has just mentioned, but I guess on the flip side, To provide some context, when I joined, we had 4 trainees sitting in each of our kind of quarter of the business. We're now looking at entering up to 30 trainees as of January, whilst also trying to phase in the new route to qualification. So I've chosen to go down the route of listening to what we've got in the business, and we've worked very, very closely with the trainees that we've had and have come alongside that growth with us in how we I suppose look to roll out the SQE for us. So I've mentioned, we cover 4 areas of the business, and our core main areas are law, corporate, commercial, disputes, real estate and employment. We still rotate our trainees round. We don't intend to ever lose that because, again, mirroring what Catherine said, I just think there's huge value to be added in getting that practical hands-on experience. And as much as you can do the theory-based stuff, either with your training provider or university, whichever route you go down, there is definitely something to be said around what you learn on the job and the tools doing the job that develops, I think, the end result and the lawyer you get upon qualification. So I know we will never move away from that sort of 2-year rotation, and that is something that we will always retain, whether it be old school training contract, new school qualifying work experience. That will still very much form a part of what we decide to do going forward. I suppose the main difference between what Catherine has mentioned and what we're doing at the moment is that we've chosen to, I guess, roll with SQE as it happens. So our first student enrolled, going back, would have been November, I believe, 21 now. So has just done the SQE exams, finishing last week. So we'll know in February how his results go. Fully expecting him to pass, to be honest. So we'll have our first qualification route and student coming that way in November. And then I guess we're using him, I suppose, as our case study. So when he came on board, we made it very clear that we're learning with him, and it's been very much a 2-pronged approach. So he's feeding back on the exams, he's feeding back on the provider we're using, which has been fantastic, Barbary. And we're very much all learning together, and then we're making informed decisions as we go. That being said, we're not phasing out LPC at the moment. What we're doing is we're increasing our SQE headcount. So we're at a headcount of 4 at the moment, with the intention to take more SQE students and trainees from our next assessment centre in February. But making it very clear that as a firm, we are still learning and we are still deciding on exactly what is going to work for us as a business, but equally what is going to work for the individuals we're bringing through. And we take the view that they are our future, they're our lawyers of the future, and what we decide to do very much has to have the input of them at the same time to make sure we're getting it right for both sides of the table, really. So slightly different to what has been mentioned. It's working for us really well at the moment. It keeps things very interesting, trying to balance the LPC students as well as the SQE students. But so far the results have been, really positive. And we're hoping that it'll continue getting us to kind of where we need to be going forward.
Thank you, Helena. Yes, a bit of a different approach there. And there's a couple of issues I think would be interesting to dig into in a bit around that sort of LPC versus SQE sort of mix and transition. And also you mentioned the training provider there, and how a firm might choose their training provider would be interesting to explore. But before we do that, should we go over to you, Nicola? How have you approached things at Acuity?
Hi, Ben. Yeah, thank you. I joined Acuity about 18 months ago, having spent around about 7 years at another top 100 law firm. So very much like Catherine, the SQE had been on my radar for many, many years. So moving to a slightly smaller firm, so we've got around about 130 employed staff. I suppose it was how I transposed what I thought I would be doing in a much larger firm and applied it to a smaller firm. So I suppose our approach has probably been a mixture of what Catherine and Helena have been doing. I think for us, the biggest challenges, the biggest concerns about transitioning to the SQE were around just purely the practicalities. Acuity had historically tended to just hire LPC graduates as trainees. Obviously, the landscape is changing. It changed a lot quicker than we were anticipating. We did think that candidates especially would want to continue with the LPC for a lot longer than they have. But I suppose in true Acuity fashion, we just sort of thought, well, we best off jumping feet first. We kind of had an idea of what wouldn't work for us. So things like block release wouldn't work for us. We do a lot of transactional work. So saying to departments, Joe Bloggs is going to be off every Friday would not work for them. So I suppose what we have come up with is probably a bit more of a creative solution and a combination of what Catherine and Helena are doing. So we front load sort of a relatively large portion of SQE1 in the sort of couple of months preceding them officially started their training contract. So, they've pretty much got 2/3 of it done. And then sort of when they're in the business, as I said, we couldn't go for block release. So we've got a sort of an agreement with each department that as and when workloads allow, they should be releasing the trainees home to study. And then I suppose longer term, then our SQE is actually going to be delivered over 2.5 years rather than the 2, and that's because of it is more disruptive to have people sort of out of the business, either studying and or sort of doing exams, but the way we've structured our SQE is that actually all the SQE exams should be finished by their 3rd seat, and their 5th seat will essentially be the qualification seat, so a return to a previous department, or if they haven't yet decided on their NQs, sort of a new department entirely. We recently doubled the amount of trainees that we take, very much like Helena. When I started, I think there was actually 3 trainees. We're now sort of aiming for around sort of 14 to 16 a year. We've already got 1 individual doing the SQE. We've made a round of offers very recently, and interestingly, 50% of them were SQE candidates. So I think the shift has been far quicker than we were anticipating. I know Helena mentioned that you use Barbary for your provider. We use the College of Legal Practice, which is all online, so it does really sort of help with the fact that they don't need to sort of be in a prescribed place on any given day of the week. And actually, we found them exceptionally good in terms of actually creating cohorts with timings that suit us. So our SQE studies are always delivered over 40 weeks, so to minimise the impact on the business.
Thank you, Nicola. And I suppose it's worth me saying, as a scrupulously sort of independent and impartial regulator, that we've had a couple of training providers mentioned already. There are obviously other training providers out there who exist, but that's really interesting, the point you made there about I suppose, slightly being surprised by the speed at which some people are doing the SQE. And I think to echo that, Julie, we've seen probably more candidates taking the SQE than perhaps we first anticipated in the first year or two. As you said there, more than 6,000. So I suppose the question I wanted to ask was on, you've touched upon this, is who wants to just explain how are you managing that mix where you've got some people LPC, some people SQE? Is there going to be a cut-off when you just say, actually, we're only going to take SQE people at this point? Does someone want to go first on that one? Yeah, Nicola, do you want to go, and then others feel free to join in?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is tricky because we've now got people doing training over 2.5 years, and then others doing it over 2 years, and then within that, then there are some people who've got time to count. So, a good Excel spreadsheet is serving me well at this point. And it's not insurmountable. I mean, it's essentially just sort of keeping on top of your administration. We're not going to have a cut-off point where we say, you can only qualify via the SQE after this date. I think we've all had candidates in the past that, for whatever reason, did their LPC, went off, maybe did something different, and actually return into the profession. So I wouldn't want to cut my nose off to spite my face. There should still be some good candidates out there. So for as long as the LPC is out there and it's viable, and the quality of candidates is as they've always been, then we'll just carry on running both. And my Excel spreadsheet will get a lot larger as a result.
Well, I'm jealous of you that you've got an Excel spreadsheet that serves you well. If you could teach me how to make that work. What about you, Catherine? How are you approaching it?
I was going to say, Nicola, that's quite brave. I don't think we were kind of thinking we'd be able to do that. I don't know if it's because our numbers are a little bit bigger, but we just felt as a firm we wouldn't be able to manage two sort of lots of trainees going through different routes. With the traditional period of recognised training, you've still got to deliver PSC. You still have to have your training principal in place to register the training contracts, sign them off at the end. So it just felt to us that it was just going to be too much to have kind of both routes running simultaneously. So we did make the call that we would have that cut off. So I think, as I mentioned previously, from 2024, all of our trainees who join us will be going through the SQE route, regardless of kind of previous qualifications or LPC, etc. The only thing I would say is if they've already got an LPC at the point that we offer them, we won't make them sit SQE1, as I know they're exempt from sitting SQE1, but they will still do the full preparation course that we've identified we want all our future trainees to do, and then of course they'll sit SQE2 as well. So that's the decision we came to as a firm.
Great. What about you, Helena?
Again, similar to what Nicola was just saying, I've not seen a massive difference in terms of having both the LPC and SQE running alongside. And I think the reason we've not struggled with it is because we've still got our 2-year training contract cycles in place. I think the biggest difference, and perhaps a bit of a mix of coming out of COVID and having to shift our timelines, and also introducing SQE, is that we've ended up doubling up. So we have 2 cohorts running on a 2-year cycle. So they start every September, every January. What that allows us to do is the flexibility to input then our SQE trainees. So they will join in a normal trainee cohort like those running on the LPC route. But we then just run their training, I suppose, around that and where they'll go off and do either the 20-week programme or the 40-week programme. We're still very much trialling that at the moment. So we've got students going down all 3 options to us, 10-week, 20-week, 40-week, for us to best understand what's going to benefit us as a business. But to be honest, I think our trainees are they're great trainees, and they know what they need to do, and they just get on with it and then feed back to us as and when, which makes our lives a lot easier.
Thank you. Well, we've got quite a few questions coming in, but I'm going to give a shout out to Lisa Slater because she wins the prize for the first question we got in. And her question is, she says, we're seeing an increasing number of paralegals wanting to bypass the training contract programme and become a firm associate via the SQE, combining that with obviously qualifying work experience. And Lisa's question is, how are other firms dealing with such requests? With the fear that she has of this is avoiding a 2-tier system, because namely, what conditions or criteria are firms putting in place to recognise that there is an alternative pathway for paralegals? Nicola, did you want to come in on that first, and then others can come in if they want to?
Yeah, absolutely, Ben. I mean, there's obviously a few bits in there to sort of unpick. I mean, when we're looking at our own paralegals, we're not giving them, I suppose, what you would call time to count. And we're saying that, if you become a trainee with us, then you have to do the full 2.5 years. Obviously, if it suits us at some point in the future to essentially qualify them early, sort of after the 2 years, then we will do that. But for us, we need that trainee resource, and we need that surety that they're going to be there for sort of that defined period. I think in terms of other people, when I speak to, prospective trainees, when I speak to law students, I do try to get them to think about sort of the longer term. Yes, you can qualify as quickly as 2 years, and that's fine. And yes, you might pass your SQE first attempt, but also you have to be sort of, we have to be reminding them that once they're qualified, and there's additional responsibilities that come with that, so they have to be comfortable to practice. So if they're if the quality of their QWE it hasn't been sort of necessarily what we would expect, then they may find themselves struggling. So I'm still when I speak to people, I'm still urging them to not necessarily qualify as quickly as possible by any means. They need to make sure that they will be comfortable in practicing, when that time comes. So, I suppose that's what I'm doing, sort of my little bit.
Someone else want to come in on that one?
Yeah, I think in addition to that, Ben, I guess the approach and the looking at it is I don't think there is a one answer that fits all in that question. We take the view of it's very much case by case. We've got individuals at the moment that are very much ready to become a solicitor. They're proving in everything that they're doing that they're ready, and we will take into account the time to count if we can and get them on their way. But we do take a view at each case and each individual and looking at where they are and when they're ready. At the end of the day, everything's in their benefit, and we're acting to make sure that we're giving them the best start to their legal career going forward. So I think within that, we've still got some work to do around what QWE looks like for us outside of our training contract and the way that we're looking to keep going with that. But I do think there isn't a one right answer. I think it depends on the individual to an extent and the situation and circumstances they're in at that point in time. And that's the nice bit about SQE and the flexibility that it does offer.
Catherine, presumably you've got paralegals, some I imagine who are very able and competent and maybe competent enough to qualify as a solicitor. How are you dealing with them coming to you saying, hey, I want to qualify through the SQE?
Yeah, absolutely. We do have quite a big paralegal population in the firm, and that was something we identified quite early on, was that we would start getting individuals coming to us saying, we want to qualify, will please sign off on my QWE. They may be self-funding themselves through the SQE. And I think, at the end of the day, this was one of the points of introducing the SQE, wasn't it, to broaden access so that there isn't kind of this bottleneck of people trying to secure training contracts. So I think, we were very mindful that we would get these requests. So we quickly put in place a QWE policy and how that would all be signed off, etc. But sort of aside from that, I think what we realised is that there could well be an untapped pool of talent here, who for whatever reason might not have been able to secure training contracts in the past. So what we decided to do was actually to get some funding to put our sort of highest performing paralegals through the SQE each year. So we now, we've named it the SQE Academy. And so each year we're funding 10 paralegals through the SQE through a preparation course, which they're studying part-time while they're working, and we give them a day off a week paid to do that. And then we also are giving them a stint in another practice group outside of their home team. I mean, they're still continuing in a paralegal role, just so that they get a little bit more of a breadth of experience. So absolutely, that's kind of an additional pipeline of talent for us now through to qualification alongside our trainees and our apprentices as well. So that's how we've sort of identified that. And then for those who don't get a place on the academy, as I say, we're still very much signing off on that QWE and teams are individually doing what they can to support them through.
Thank you, Catherine. Really interesting to hear the different approaches there. Catherine, we've just had a specific question come through for you, and it was someone who wanted to just clarify, are Eversheds requiring both SQE1 and 2 before someone starts at the firm, or is it just SQE1?
Yeah, no, so it's both. So that's what we're intending, is that our future trainees will take and pass SQE1 and 2 before they then come to us for their 2 years. So we've then got that certainty that is kind of done and dusted, because I think that was sort of one of our concerns, is that we bring trainees in and there's a lot of time and investment that goes into them, and if they don't pass at the end, sort of where does that leave everybody? So yeah, that was one of the reasons for us wanting to sort of front load the exams before they come and join us.
And maybe we'll come on to various approaches to, if you have trainees who failed the SQE, how are you going to manage that? But let's move on to, we've got some questions about qualifying work experience. And thank you to Sarah. She's asked us what counts as full-time qualifying work experience for qualifying when we want 2 years of full-time qualifying work experience. Is that 40 hours a week? Is that 30 hours a week? Julie, should we come to you first on that one?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's a good question, but we don't actually prescribe what constitutes full-time. Working patterns are increasingly flexible and diverse, and we don't want to say it's got to be X hours to constitute a full-time role. So we just suggest that firms and indeed candidates take a common sense approach. We've had questions about what if somebody's working compressed hours? Does that count as full-time? Or, what would you normally do? How would you normally describe that role within your firm? I think just what works for you in a common sense sort of way, and what aligns with your normal working practices within your firm.
Yeah, we don't want to be too prescriptive in this area. I think the area where this is often a big challenge is, for instance, organisations like law clinics, where people can be working very low numbers of hours over a period of time, and what that would count. Did any of our panellists, and no worries if you don't want to comment at all on how they're approaching the totting up of time? I'll take oh yes, someone was coming in.
I was going to say, I think, again, it's we haven't given it a number because I think everybody, no human's the same, and no one learns the same, no one works the same, no one, we all do things our own way. And I think for us, it's, from looking back in the last year, 18 months, it's fairly obvious, again, I think going back to what I said earlier, when somebody is ready and when someone needs a bit more time. We will probably use the parameters of our 2-year training contract for seats and cycles, and model our qualifying work experience around that as being a kind of proof of the pudding. It's worked for us in the past. It gives us really good trainees and a good quality. Why break what's not broken? I guess it's just allowing for the flexibility around it as and when the cases do arise. We potentially have one now shortly where we're going to have to ask ourselves that question on what it means. But I don't think we'll ever put a firm number on it. I think it's what's right for the individual.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I suppose one message from us at the SRA, and why, even if you're not thinking of that, the SQE impacts you that much immediately as a firm, it may be the case that you have people who work for you who come for confirmation of qualifying work experience. So you need to think through how you're going to manage that. Out of interest of our panellists, is it HR, sort of HR part of the business, it's leading on recording the sort of that process, even if it's ultimately the solicitor or compliance officer who needs to sign up, or is it sort of at a partner compliance officer level? Anyone want to share how they're managing that?
Yeah, I'm happy to share. So essentially it's falling within HR. I think anything SQE related sort of comes our way centrally. But as I mentioned, we put in a QWE policy quite early on the hours point. So our sort of standard full-time working week is 35 hours across the firm. So if anybody works fewer hours than that a week, or did during the period they're trying to claim, we would pro rata it accordingly. So we would work that out. But yeah, so the way we've sort of structured it is that we've identified sort of a small group of partners within the firm who we're saying internally are the only partners who can officially make the confirmation to the SRA. But the process all funnels through sort of our HR operations team, and sort of supervisors or people who were actively working alongside the individual who's claiming the QWE need to confirm that what they're claiming is a fair and accurate reflection of the work that they undertook during that time period, and that it meets the QWE requirements. Then it goes through to that sort of central partner to then check it over and then do the final confirmation through on their MySRA account.
Thank you, Catherine. We've had a question in from Brian Evans, who's said he's started his first SQE, or he's got his first SQE trainee starting in September, and he's asking, is there a need to register the training of SQE trainees like there was with traditional training contracts? I think the answer to that is no. You don't need to register anyone. The point at which that sort of goes into our system is where, if you're confirming qualifying work experience, or obviously they're also signing up for the exam on the SQE website. Chip in anyone if I've got the answer to that wrong, but I'm aware we've got about 15 minutes left, and we've got a few topics and questions I want to get through. Just to check, we've mentioned training providers. How did people go about choosing their training provider? What type of factors? What would your tips be for a firm in terms of considering how they choose a training provider for the SQE?
I don't mind taking this one, Ben.
Yeah.
I think for us it was about flexibility. My initial starting point was to kind of go to the big players. Barbary have always provided us with the PSC, so we've got no complaints with them. But when we were looking at sort of what we were proposing in terms of timings over the course of the year, having 2 intakes, none of the programs that were available at that time were were fit for purpose for us. They were either 20 weeks or they were starting at the wrong time. So I approached the College of Legal Practice and just explained my predicament to them. And in all fairness to them, they actually have created cohorts, that suit our timelines, which, I'm not saying they would be able to do for everyone going forward, but it is meant for us that we were able to get on the SQE route really very quickly and not, and not sort of, be sort of worried about the practicality. So, so far the feedback has been absolutely phenomenal from the students that are studying with them. They don't mind sort of it all being remote. Obviously, they're already holding their training contract offers, so it's more about the study rather than about sort of, the cohort experience and sort of, everything that comes with studying the LPC in a traditional sort of red brick way.
Thank you. And just so people know, we do have a list of all the training providers for the SQE on our website. We also did a webinar that was actually more targeted at candidates early in the year about navigating the training market and things you might want to consider choosing that. I'm going to jump on to the next question because we've got a question from Mark who's asking about the SQE training route and apprenticeships and potentially the benefits of doing apprenticeships, because you can get 95% of the sort of the state paying for the fees of training. Catherine, you're one of the firms I think who's been one of the first movers on apprenticeships and have already had some apprentices take the SQE. Do you want to talk through why you chose to do that and how that's panned out for you?
Yeah, thanks, Ben. So, I think as I mentioned at the beginning, we've been recruiting solicitor apprentices since 2016. So we were, I think, the first large law firm, anyway, to get involved in that Trailblazer solicitor apprenticeship program. And for us, we were, I suppose, quite fortunate that our previous chief exec was, very passionate about social mobility and broadening access to the profession. So actually, it came from the top for us. It wasn't a case of having to sort of persuade kind of more senior people in the firm that it was the right thing to do. And it was innovative. And I think we were just really keen to do it. So we just sort of jumped in and got on with it, I suppose. It's been a massive learning experience along the way, particularly because there haven't been that many others sort of doing it alongside us. So we've had to sort of make lots of decisions on various things as we've gone along. And obviously, when it came to sort of the final year of the apprenticeship for that first cohort who joined us in 2016, they were among the first people to take the first sitting of SQE1 last year and SQE2 in April of this year. But a fantastic success story for us. So 7 of our apprentices all passed SQE2 in September and have stayed with us as newly qualified lawyers in the firm. I think.
Do you think apprentices are more loyal? I mean, I suppose there's time, but there is a suggestion that if you take in an apprentice sort of early doors, get them into the firm's culture, that sometimes they can almost be perhaps more loyal or more bought into the firm. Or have you spotted that?
Yeah, I think so. I suppose time will tell. I guess, they were probably stuck with us for the first 6 years until they finished their apprenticeship anyway.
We'll come back to you in 10 years' time with that question. I'll
come back and ask me then.
Yeah.
But, we're delighted that, all of them have stayed with us at qualification. They're all, we've just been on a journey together with them. So we just feel like we all know each other really well and hope that they will have really long, successful careers. So, I think time will tell on that loyalty piece. But it's just been a really good success story for us, and everybody in the firm is so bought into it and just loves having apprentices, basically. So we're always being asked, can we take more more apprentices?
And it's interesting, the results from the SQE exams, again, early days yet, show that apprentices are performing significantly better than your average candidates. So it does seem to tally that it is preparing people well, and they're good candidates when they get to take the SQE. Just as a cross promotion, if you're a firm interested in taking apprentices, we did a webinar earlier in the year on the practicalities around that, including even if you're a small firm. We have one firm on that webinar who's only got 5 or 6 staff, but they still had an apprentice, and they're really positive about that. So I was just going to come to you, Helena, because just a reminder, at the moment you can only take on apprentices if you've got offices in England. I think that's the case. But Helena, you've been considering sort of apprenticeships, haven't you? Is that right?
Yes, we have. So there's a lady that works within Cardiff and a number of companies looking at this relationship between Welsh Government and SILEX. They released something this summer in partnership to encourage businesses like ourselves to be looking to take on apprenticeships. I think it's fair to say, Capital, and where we've come from and where we're going, I've mentioned we're growing. I don't think we've ever really been set up to do it justice, really, and be in a position where we could do that, years gone by. But I definitely feel now is coming up to the right time that it's something that we can offer and it's something we should be offering. I've always been conscious again about, it's very much these are our future lawyers. What I don't want to do is ever put ourselves in a position where we're not ready. We need to make sure that experience and the training they get is where it needs to be. So it is something that we're in the process of looking into and working out and proposing as to how we do that going forward. This call has probably been as useful for me in hearing what Catherine's had to say as it is the people listening. But it is something we're looking to move on in the next 12 months.
And thank you. Leah's sent in a question saying, are all the firms funding both SQE1 and SQE2? I suppose speak up if you're not funding one of them. So it sounds like everyone's funding it. I suppose, are you considering candidate, if I'm a candidate and I rock up to you and I've taken SQE1, or maybe if I've taken SQE1 and 2, would you still consider me for part of that sort of training programme?
Yeah, I'm happy.
Helen, again, yeah.
So this is part of our case at the moment. So we fund both SQE1 and SQE2. I think one of the questions we have as a firm at the moment that we'll probably decide in the next 6 to 12 months is whether we ask people to sit SQE1 before they join us, whether we split that and say you have to have done 50% before, 50% after. It's something that we're considering depending on the results and the feedback we're getting at the moment and the route we're currently going down. And I'll be honest, it's not a decision that's been made. We're very, very keen to make sure we're as successful as possible. So as it stands, we'll continue funding. And I think it's just mitigating that risk as to how we make sure people are going to be successful, a little bit like what Catherine said earlier, in actually succeeding and passing SQE1 and SQE2. But that's for us to still decide.
Anyone else want to share thoughts on that?
Yeah, I don't mind. I'm not sure if the question, Ben, was more sort of if somebody comes to us having done SQE1, SQE2 and hasn't been sponsored by us. Am I right? Is that kind of...
I suppose so, because I think you are funding both SQE1 and 2 for people who go through your process. But I suppose the addendum to that is, well, yeah, what if someone's come to you and already done some of that?
I mean, for us, we would just, they would go through the same assessment process as they would have ordinarily had they not, had they been applying for us to fund their studies. I think we would potentially, though, in circumstances where they have completed the SQE1 and 2 and successfully passed them, we would probably consider them on a 2-year training contract rather than the 2.5-year that SQE trainees are currently doing with us. So yeah, I suppose that would be the approach that we would take. And we've already seen that candidates are applying to us already, sort of self-funding their SQE preparatory courses. So I think that will come to the fore sort of a bit sooner than we were anticipating.
Now, obviously, as someone who works at the SRA, I'm going to be entirely positive about the SQE, but I would be naive, wouldn't I, if I didn't think that added flexibility also comes with challenges and decisions to make. And you've sort of shared some of that. But does anyone want to share sort of a particular challenge they've had and perhaps how they've got about that might be useful for firms to think about? Catherine, perhaps I'll put you on the spot on that one first.
Yeah, that's fine. So I think for us, one of the learnings we had over this summer, because this was the first summer we were making offers for SQE trainees, was that I don't think everybody fully understood that that's what the offering was going to be until they got it. So, as a team, we felt we'd been quite clear and open about it. It was on our website and, we'd been talking to candidates about it at all the fairs and different things. But I don't think it was clear enough, because when we got to the point of making those offers, some people were saying, oh, well, no, I don't want to do the SQE. I want to do the LPC. And then there was some difficult conversations to be had at that point. But so, yeah, for me, I think it's really just about communication, both internally and externally, actually, is just making sure everybody within the firm understands what it is, the firm's position is on SQE and when it's happening, what that looks like. But yeah, particularly with candidates and externally, what it is you're offering and what they can expect back as well.
Nicola, what about you? What are challenges at your end?
I suppose just to pick up on what Catherine has said, for us it was just very simply, there's a tick box that candidates select whether they want to do the SQE or the LPC. We also have a non-rotational SQE offering where people can specialise, and also a Silex route, so that's kind of helped, I suppose, with clarity at that point. As with the other challenge for us, as you know, lawyers are a traditional bunch. They were liked what they were getting with the LPC. It was familiar. They knew what to expect. So I suppose part of my role is helping manage internal expectations. I think I've been really fortunate that the SQE candidates that we've had come through have been absolutely exceptional. So I think it's really quelled any sort of reservations from partners as to the quality of the candidates that are coming through. They were so used to having LPC graduates that they thought that all these sort of LLB graduates were going to be very, very green, and they're going to sort of have to carry them for their first couple of seats, and that's not proved to be true. So for us, I was saying to one of your colleagues a couple of weeks back, the SQE is a total non-issue now. The only discernible difference is when I send the rotation round. This is just a little footnote to say whether it's SQE or LPC, just to add as a sort of it's an age memoir, really, just to say that they will need some time out for study, and really it's a non-issue now. So I'd encourage people just to kind of go for it, because once you're in it, it's less scary, or sort of less hassle than you anticipate it to be.
Nicola, can I nick some of those taglines? The SQE is a non-issue now. It's less hassle than I thought it was going to be. Yes, we'll perhaps put that on the website.
50p a tagline for you.
Right, okay then. Oh, well, I don't have a budget to extend to that, but yes, you'll get the patent lawyers on me, right, or copyright lawyers, right? And what about you, Helena? I mean, Nicola talked about shifts in mindset. Have you found that sort of at partner level or within a firm there has to be a bit of that shift in mindset? Is that a challenge?
Yeah, absolutely. And not necessarily a challenge in a bad way. I think it's a case of the LPC has been around so long. It's always been the route to qualification, and again, human nature, not many people tend to like change. So when you go against the grain in terms of saying we're getting rid of this now and bringing this in, I think that's naturally going to raise questions as to how it's going to work. It's not like it's a small thing either. The route to qualification is a pretty big deal. But when you break it down, echoing what I know both of these ladies have said, we chose to go with it because until you start doing it, you're not going to know what's right for you and what isn't right for you. There's going to be big firms, small firms, mid-sized firms, and it isn't a one-size-fits-all. And that's what's great about the SQE, because it allows you to tailor it to what you need within your business and maintain that flexibility, which I think the LPC did actually stilt. So I think there's been at times we've had to, or I've had to bring the partners and the senior team on the journey with me. Do I think we're there yet? No, but that's more in terms of educating, because they haven't had to really look at it over the last 18 months because it's very much been behind the scenes. We introduce it. We're now getting to the point where we're making decisions on what that looks like for the business going forward. But again, being very lucky, everyone's very receptive. It's just more trying to understand what it means for us as a business and why it's changing and what that's going to look like going forward. I think the communication that goes out is definitely key, and as long as people know what's going on and we get that right, I don't see there being any problems. I think the only thing I would say in terms of your original question, in terms of a challenge, I will add is obviously SQE1. I think the feedback we've had from our internal students is there's a lot of information that needs to be learned, and I think we weren't expecting the sheer amount of questions on that multiple choice style that I'm aware that doesn't suit everybody. So whilst it's not a challenge at the moment, it's something that we're having to factor going forward in terms of pass rate and success rate, because that won't suit everybody, and it's how we look after those people as well, basically.
Thank you. No, that's really interesting. I'm looking at the clock and I see we're just a couple of minutes from the end of this webinar. It's absolutely flown by. Apologies to those of you who've asked questions that we haven't been able to get to. There's lots more topics that have been really interesting to talk about. Julie, can I come to you with one very quick question, which I think probably is quite a short answer. John Spence has asked that in the past, the Law Society provided templates and precedents for firms to adapt. Could the SRA or the Law Society provide a template of an employment contract to be given to perhaps a qualifying work experience paralegal or trainee? Julie.
Yeah, I think it's something I would be a bit reluctant for the SRA to do, because as soon as a regulator puts out an example of something that could be done, there's a risk that it will seem to be the norm or the requirement, and there's a risk that it could very much work against the flexibility that we're seeking to embed through these opportunities. It may be something that the Law Society might consider, but again, they might want to put out a suite of options to recognise the different ways in which you might be, as a firm, seeking to employ such a trainee or a paralegal. So yeah, I think a bit of caution from the SRA's perspective on that.
Thank you. Well, let's finish off now. I wanted to sort of give our panelists one last chance to sort of one final takeaway message for our listeners and viewers. Catherine, shall we come to you?
Yeah, so I suppose I would just say, look, embrace the change, because it's here, it's not going away, and just use it as an opportunity to think about how you might want to do things a bit differently, because actually it does open up so much more flexibility and opportunity for law firms. So yeah, just try and embrace it. There might be some challenges and hiccups along the way, but I think, you know, the great thing is that every law firm is going through the same thing. You know, we're all going through this together. So what's nice is just to be able to, you know, do things like this where you can speak to colleagues and counterparts at other firms, just to sort of share ideas, etc. So yeah, that would be my sort of takeaway, really, is just embrace it and see it as an opportunity rather than something difficult which we want to bury our heads in the sand about.
Thank you. Can I come to you, Nicola? I've been a terrible chair and I'm potentially keeping you from a train that you need to get urgently. So, but what's your last takeaway?
Very much the same as Catherine. Don't fear it. You just suck it and see. You know, you've just got to sort of give it a go, make it work for you. You know, take the wins, take the advantages where you can find them. You know, we've introduced a specialist SQE route, which will be great for us. You know, it will help us sort of breed the next generation of a specific type of lawyer. So there are opportunities there for people to capitalise on. You've just got to, you know, as Catherine said, take your head out of the sand and just embrace it. We don't have any other choice.
Thank you, that's brilliant. And Helena, are you going to go with an ostrich analogy as well, or are we going to get a different takeaway from you?
I'm not that exciting, sorry, Ben. I think what I would say is just don't forget why the SQE was brought in and what the purpose of it was. And I think the underlying thing is it's to make it more accessible. It's to attract a wider, more diverse group of individuals into the sector. And I think if you run with it with that in mind, you can't really go too wrong. So everything we do, everything we decide, everything we run with, even if we're figuring it out right now, is always with the mindset that where do we want to be in the future and how are we going to get the right people kind of on that journey with us, basically. Everything else figures out from there.
Thank you. No, that's great. And I think it's such an important point. Having this consistent assessment means that actually, hopefully, that can broaden your horizons in terms of recruitment, because everyone's got to meet the same standard. Whereas perhaps in the old system, people were very reliant, perhaps sometimes, on what university somebody went to or where they studied, because there wasn't a sort of single assessment. But we're going to have to see how that pans out over the coming years, because we are still very much in early days. So thank you ever so much for you, our audience, for joining us. Huge thank you to all our panelists. I think that's been absolutely fascinating run through how they're approaching the SQE. Hopefully you found some stuff useful there, but I would like to just not rely on my own hope. I would like to hear your feedback. So we actually have a link below. We'd love to hear how you found this webinar. You know, was it good? Was there things we could have improved? Are there other topics you'd like us to cover in the future? Click on the link below. You can provide that feedback in the space of, it'll only take you a minute or two, but it will really help us understand how we can improve things and how this all went. Otherwise, as I say, thank you. And this is the last session of today for our virtual compliance conference. And we're on to the final day of the conference tomorrow. And there's 2 sessions there. One of them is a chat between Clive Myrie, the journalist, and our chair and CEO at the SRA. That's a really interesting chat. I'd recommend that to anyone who's interested in what we think the big sector trends are in terms of the legal sector and regulation. And then finally, we're going to finish off with a session on sort of practical innovation in law firms and what you could do there. Again, very much focused, like today, on the law firm perspective on that. So thank you again. I hope everyone enjoys their afternoon, and I hope Nicola got her train. All the best.